listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the Federal Liberal Party has officially dumped its net zero by 2050 climate target. The opposition leader Sussan Ley holding a special news conference promising the party will put affordable energy first with a responsible emissions target. So what does this major policy backflip mean for the embattled opposition, Australia's soaring power bills, and our plan to tackle climate change? We'll unpack all of today's crucial developments in just a moment. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Thursday, the 13th of November. Neo-Nazi leader Thomas Sewell has been released from prison after being granted bail by a Victorian Supreme Court judge. The 32-year-old was arrested and charged with 21 offences relating to an attack on a First Nations camp in Melbourne's King Domain in August. Sewell was previously denied bail 2 months ago after he was deemed a danger to the community by a magistrate. A 17-year-old Queensland teenager has been sentenced to 16 years jail for the murder of 70-year-old grandmother Vyleen White. The teenager, who cannot be identified for legal reasons, fatally stabbed Miss White at Redbank Plains Shopping Centre in Ipswich in February last year. The attack was witnessed by her young grandchild. Surrounded by friends and family, Vyleen's husband, Victor White, welcomed today's sentence.
Whatever sentence is imposed, it's never ever going to be enough on our family's behalf.
And Victoria has made history, becoming the first Australian state to sign a treaty with Aboriginal people. The landmark agreement, the first of its kind in the nation, is now formally law after being signed today by Victoria's Premier Jacinta Allen, the co-chairs of the First Peoples Assembly and the state's governor. The 34-page document commits to ongoing Aboriginal-led governance, accountability and truth-telling mechanisms to be established next year. Nangara Murray, co-chair of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, says it's an historic moment.
Today marks a turning point in our nation's history, a moment where old wounds can begin to heal and new relationships can be built on truth, justice and mutual respect.
Now it's time to get into our deep dive on today's move by the Federal Liberal Party to dump its net zero policy. Sussan Ley came out swinging today, saying the party was focused on delivering affordable energy first. She also lashed out at the federal government, accusing the Prime Minister of lying.
Anthony Albanese lied to Australians when he said he had a plan for cheaper power prices. And every bill, every month, every quarter is a reminder of that lie. Prime Minister, when are the bills coming down?
But exactly how will the coalition's policy make energy more affordable? Will this move win or lose votes? And has Sussan Ley just secured her position as opposition leader and united what was just days ago a broken coalition? Joining us is political journalist with the Saturday paper, Koutsoukis, who was in Canberra watching this all unfold. Jason, thanks so much for joining us. Extraordinary day again in Canberra with the federal opposition. Not a speculation, the Liberal Party was set to dump its commitment to net zero and it was confirmed today. Can you explain exactly what Sussan Ley announced?
So the Liberal Party met for 5 hours on Wednesday to enable the leadership of the party to take a sounding of where each member of the Liberal Party room stood on this issue of net zero emissions by 2050. Then today, the Shadow Cabinet got together. They also met for several hours this morning. And just after 2 p.m. today, Sussan Ley came out before the media in the Coalition Party room here in Parliament House and announced that, as we expected, the Coalition has formally dumped net zero as a policy. The Liberal Party has dumped it. The National Party has dumped it several weeks ago. And now we're waiting for the Coalition Party room as a whole, as in both Liberals and Nationals, to announce a formal kind of how they're going to do this going forward towards the next election. So we're expecting that policy announcement on Sunday, but that doesn't really make much difference. What Sussan Ley announced today pretty much tells us everything we need to know.
Front and centre, we saw a number of occasions. Clearly, there was a messaging that they wanted to hit, and that was the fact that the Liberal Party wanted to say that this is about making energy affordable. Do you think that's going to resonate with voters?
Well, I think that's yet to be decided, because up until now, we've had a kind of a bipartisan consensus when it comes to net zero emissions by 2050. Now, for the first time, we don't have that bipartisan consensus. And just like we saw with the voice referendum in 2024, once the bipartisan consensus broke down on the voice, we saw public support for that yes case fall right away. And I think that a lot of the coalition hardheads are thinking that the same will happen with net zero, that now that the coalition has said we don't agree with doing everything we can to have net zero emissions by 2050, they're betting that the voters will respond to the arguments that they're now going to make, that Labor's plan is too expensive, it's going to cost voters too much. And I guess the coalition think that more voters are going to now be receptive to that argument. They may not have heard that argument before, and the coalition is betting that that at least some voters will follow them and agree with them that it's just too expensive to deliver net zero emissions by 2050.
Jason, a couple of questions regarding the details of this stance or back down by the Liberal Party. They have said that they will abandon their commitment to net zero emissions, but still adhere to the Paris Agreement. How does that work?
Well, the coalition is arguing that by reducing emissions on average year on year for every 5 years of our nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement, that we will meet our commitments, that by doing our fair share and comparing ourselves with what other countries are doing, or doing as much as what comparable countries are doing, that we will be able to maintain our commitments to the Paris Agreement. But it's not actually clear how they're going to do this. The actual mechanics of reducing our greenhouse emissions, the coalition, they haven't got an answer for that yet. So that very much remains in the to-be-seen basket.
You make a great point there, Jason, because we saw similar promises from the federal government in the lead up to the last election saying we will bring power prices down. We know that hasn't happened. So do you have any idea on how the Liberal Party will do it? It's great to make a promise about, Sussan Ley said, under the Liberal government, your power prices will be cheaper, but they haven't delivered the detail on how they're actually going to do it.
No, they haven't. I mean, look, they are talking about technologies which aren't really proven yet. They're talking about carbon capture and storage. They're talking about next generation technology. This is, zero emission nuclear technology, for instance. They're talking about small scale solar, which is focused on commercial and industrial warehouse rooftops. Another thing that was mentioned today in the document released by Sussan Ley is something called soil carbon, which I'm not really sure what that means, but there's other things like biofuels, blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is where you break down water into oxygen and hydrogen and use just regular coal-fired power to do that, and use the hydrogen to power other kind of forms of electricity generation. So there's a kind of mix of new technologies here that the coalition is hoping will be cheaper than what the Albanese government is offering in terms of its energy transition plan.
After this announcement from Sussan Ley, David Littleproud, the leader of the Nationals, was quick again to hold a news conference. He came out and praised Sussan Ley's leadership, had said that the Nationals, it's not about the science of climate change, it's about the economics. That's a real flip from the Nationals as well, isn't it?
It is. It was Barnaby Joyce, the then leader of the Nationals, who agreed with the then Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, to come. the two of them together came up with the coalition's net zero emissions by 2050 policy. So the Nationals were intimately involved in that just a few years ago. Now they've abandoned that. I think David Littleproud, if you got him in a room with just the two of us, I think deep down, David Littleproud is probably a supporter of the net zero policy. But there's people in his party room like Matt Canavan, Barnaby Joyce, Michael McCormack, who are implacably opposed to it, and they simply have the numbers. David Littleproud does not have the numbers to carry net zero. So his party room backflipped on this a few weeks ago. And essentially, they really forced the Liberals to confront this issue earlier than Sussan Ley had wanted to. And they really have driven the change in the Liberal policy as well, that they have also abandoned net zero. I think David Littleproud today was able to say that he's very happy that the Liberals have come to the position that they have. And it's understandable why he's feeling happy, because he's probably shown that he's got more power on this issue than Sussan Ley does. And that's, I guess, a good thing for him and a bad thing for Sussan Ley.
So do you think this stance, because we know that Sussan Ley was pro-net zero, we'll get onto her leadership in just a second, but more importantly, the voters, the Australian public. We know they were obliterated, the coalition in the last election. Do you think this stance, this back down on net zero, will change any votes?
This is the big question, isn't it? And it's difficult to answer because we don't really know. The Conservative wing of the coalition would say, well, we've taken net zero to the last two elections and we lost both of those elections. So in their view, dropping net zero can only help the coalition going forward. But most opinion polls tell us that a large majority of voters support net zero. I guess we won't really know until we've seen a few opinion polls now that the two major parties have these different positions. And I guess we won't really know the real answer until the next election, which is, of course, 2.5 years away. My guess is that this will not help the coalition win back seats in metropolitan Australia. Net zero is most popular in the big cities. That's where most of the votes are. That's certainly where most of the seats are. And the coalition doesn't really hold many of those metropolitan seats any longer. So I can't see how this policy is going to help them win back voters in the big cities where they need to win voters if they're ever going to get back into government.
Okay, let's talk, Jason, about Sussan Ley's leadership. We know, as we mentioned earlier, she was pro-net zero. One may argue she's been rolled by the more conservative portion or the conservative players within the party. We know when they went into that meeting, she was almost bullied. She walked in there alone and a whole group of conservatives came in together as a united front. Do you think after today, Sussan Ley's leadership is secure or not secure?
I think Sussan Ley's leadership is untenable because the majority of her party has united to roll her, as you said, on this key policy position. Sussan Ley's deputy, Ted O'Brien, didn't support her. Her key numbers person, Alex Hawke, this is the leader of the centre-right faction from New South Wales. He abandoned net zero. Many of her key supporters in that leadership ballot that we saw after the election in May, they don't support the position that Sussan Ley has taken on net zero. So I don't see how she survives this in the long term. The other thing is that by pandering to the right of the coalition, the conservative members of her party, Sussan Ley has upset the moderate wing of her party. They say, well, you've abandoned us. You've left us kind of hanging out on this limb and you've tried to sort of pander to the right of the party, but you haven't looked after our interests. So she's ended up pleasing nobody in the party, and I think it makes it very difficult for Sussan to hang on as leader because she just does not have the numbers anymore inside her party room, and this debate over net zero has proved that. I thought that phalanx of Conservative MPs entering the party room yesterday, all standing together, was a very kind of determined show of force. it's very unusual to see things like that when MPs are just going into the party room to have a policy discussion. We normally see things like that during an actual leadership ballot, but this is not a leadership ballot, but it's become a proxy for Sussan Ley's leadership, and I think her position is very much weakened after the last 2 days.
An extraordinary day in politics again. We really appreciate your analysis and time. Thanks, Jason.
Pleasure talking with you, and thanks for the invitation to come on the podcast.
That was special correspondent for the Saturday paper, Jason Koutsoukis. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'll be back this evening with an episode of The Beefing on Harry and Meghan versus the royal family. And we'd love for you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.